When you are asked what is hernia, you should define it as an abnormal protrusion of a viscous or part or whole of a viscous through a normal or an abnormal opening in the cavity containing it. So why did I use that word normal or abnormal? Can you tell me some normal openings in the that are present in the body? Students, can you tell me?
Mouth.
Oh, nothing will herniate through mouth. Anything? So you can see when we are talking about groin hernias, you are we have two openings, isn't it? Oh, the deep ring and the external ring. So these are very good. So all these things are normally present openings, but suddenly an abnormal opening can also come. How can abnormal opening come? Okay, diaphragm. Very good, Nandan. Yes, superficial and deep rings, all these are normally placed openings. But sometimes an abnormal opening can come in a muscle that is lining the abdominal wall. So this can be an abnormal opening through which things can protrude. A weakness in the muscle can appear as an opening through which a viscous can protrude. So now, so if you consider the the incidence of hernia, 75% of hernias occur in groin region. So here, so now can you tell me some other hernias other than groin? Groin, define groin. You should also be able to define what is groin. Groin is an area between the lower part of the abdomen and the upper part of the thigh. This this colloquially it is called groin, and technically it is called inguinal region. So when you're taking history, you will take it as a groin. But when you're describing your examination, like inspection, palpation, you will be describing it as inguinal region. Now, can you tell me some other hernias other than groin hernias?
Epigastric hernia, ma'am.
Very good. Epigastric hernia. Good.
Incisional hernia.
Incisional hernia. Femoral
Traumatic
hernia.
hernia.
Okay, femoral hernia comes in the groin hernia only. So these are the areas, some of the areas. Let us see what are those areas. So you also have an hernias like a spigelian hernia, lumbar hernia, obturator hernia, umbilical hernia, epigastric, incisional hernias. Here you can see some places that I have marked for you. Epigastric hernia is nothing but it's a herniation from the linea alba. So if it is down towards the umbilicus, we call it a paraumbilical hernia. If the hernia is through the umbilical scar, we call it as an umbilical hernia. Spigelian hernia is the hernia lateral to the rectus. The rectus muscle is a spigelian hernia. We have a ventral hernia where there is divarication of the recti. We also have the groin hernias like inguinal and femoral. There is an obturator hernia. Then you can also see the lumbar hernias, right? So these are some hernias other than groin hernias. Now, before going into the hernia pathology as such, let us consider the anatomical and the normal physiological procedures that block any herniation in the body. So now today we'll talk about a groin hernia. So now in the, let us consider the anatomy. The inguinal canal is considered to be a box with 6 surfaces. What are the surfaces? It has a roof, it has a floor, it has an anterior wall, it has a posterior wall, it has a medial opening and a lateral opening. So these are the surfaces. Let us see what are these. Can you just tell me what is the roof of an inguinal canal? Students, can you tell me this? What is a roof? What is a floor? How is a roof formed? Very good. Arched fibers of conjoined tendon form the roof. Very good. How is the floor formed? How is the floor formed? Joshita, you're correct. Conjoined tendon arches over and forms the roof. Then how is the floor? What is it? Very good. Inguinal ligament forms the floor of the inguinal canal. Very good. Now coming to the anterior wall. How is the anterior wall formed? The anterior wall is formed by the external oblique aponeurosis, which in continuation forms the inguinal ligament and the floor. Now the posterior wall. How is the posterior wall formed for the inguinal canal? Posterior wall? Yes, it is conjoined tendon partly, and then the lower part is the transversalis fascia. Very good. So the transversalis fascia and the conjoined tendon, these two form the posterior wall. What is the medial opening or the medial surface of the inguinal canal? Students, the medial opening is the superficial inguinal ring. Very good. Superficial inguinal ring is a medial. What is the lateral opening through which the hernia enters, the content enter? It is a deep ring. Very good. So these are the surfaces. Now you can see this picture is showing you clearly how the contents are entering through all the layers of the abdominal wall, through the deep ring, and then coming out through the external ring. See, you can see that this is the preperitoneal, this is the peritoneum, this is the transversalis fascia, this is transversus abdominis, internal oblique, and the conjoined, and the external oblique and the external oblique aponeurosis forming the posterior wall. So beneath the inguinal ligament, we have the femoral canal. So let us see now. So this is another picture showing you how the inguinal canal is formed. So just about 3 centimeters of the to an extent of 3 centimeters, that is the length of the inguinal canal, these muscles of the abdominal wall separate and form the inguinal canal, through which the spermatic cord is brought out from the abdomen to the testis. So this is, see how you can see the inguinal canal, below which is the femoral sheath structures and the femoral canal. So now you also have to know an entity called myopectineal orifice. So this Frouchard's myopectineal orifice is a membranous area where this is deficient of any muscular structures that are covering this. This is covered on the inner aspect by only a transversalis fascia, and then exteriorly you have the skin and the external oblique, while posteriorly there is only transversalis fascia. So if there is weakness of this myopectineal orifice, there is bound to herniate, for the herniation to occur. So now what are the boundaries of this myopectineal orifice? See, above this is formed by the arched fibers of the conjoined muscles, medially by the rectus muscle, laterally and below by the iliopsoas muscle, and below by the Cooper's ligament or the pectineal ligament. This myopectineal orifice is divided into two by the inguinal ligament. So we get inguinal hernias above the inguinal ligament, and we get femoral hernias below the inguinal ligament. So this is called Frouchard's myopectineal orifice. This is very important to understand that this orifice is covered only by transversalis fascia posteriorly. So now this is also another. This picture is showing you what is a Hasselbalch's triangle. So tell me the boundaries of Hasselbalch's triangle, students. Can you tell me what is the medial boundary of the Hasselbalch's triangle? It is a rectus muscle. Very good. Lateral boundary. Lateral boundary is the inferior epigastric artery, and the boundary below is the inguinal ligament. So this is called the Hasselbalch's triangle. Very good. So through this, the direct hernias herniate, and then outside this, there is lateral to inferior epigastric artery. The indirect hernias come through the deep ring, right? So now is this anatomy different than what you have seen? So till now what we have discussed is the external anatomy that you see when you're doing an open surgery for an inguinal hernia. But then, you know, nowadays laparoscopic hernia is being done. So you should learn the anatomy that you see through laparoscope. When you put a scope and see the roof of the abdominal wall, that is the abdominal wall, you find these structures. This is what you see there. So what we see, the medial umbilical ligament, and then we have here, this is the median, then we have the medial umbilical ligaments, and then we have a lateral umbilical ligaments. So here this blue line is telling us the level of the inguinal ligament. So we have lateral, medial, and median umbilical ligaments. So that which is between median and medial is called the direct space, where you can see through which this is the Hasselbalch's triangle. This is rectus, and this is the lateral umbilical ligament is the inferior epigastric artery that you see. So here, so you can see now. I will show you another picture. So here you can see this is the lateral fold. This is the medial fold, where you can see this is a median fold in the middle. So the hernia that is occurring lateral to inferior epigastric artery is the indirect hernia. The hernia coming between the lateral and the medial umbilical ligaments, which are obliterated umbilical arteries, is a direct hernia. This is the Hasselbalch's triangle, and below the level of the inguinal ligament, you will have the femoral hernias. See, now you can see so nicely, this is the inferior epigastric artery, and this is the lateral hernia, that is the indirect hernia. This is spermatic, the vas, and this is spermatic vessels. This is called the triangle of doom, where it is the contents are the iliac vessels. So now this is just for completion's sake, I'm describing the laparoscopic appearance of the hernial orifices. Now see, this is the other side hernia, where you can see this is the right side hernia, where you can see the inferior epigastric artery and patient's right side. Laterally you see the deep ring, right? So now after the hernia, you know that there is the length of the inguinal canal is 1.5 inch. And then there are weak areas, that is a myopectineal orifice, which is bounded only by transversalis fascia. There are 2 openings in the inguinal region, potential openings. Potential means they are not open, they are filled with some structures, but the openings increase in size when the muscles become weak. But naturally, some protective mechanisms are there to prevent any herniation through these hernial openings. Can you tell me what are the protective factors for prevention of hernia, students? Can you name some protective factors? Very good. Obliquity of the inguinal canal, ball valve mechanism, shutter mechanism. Very good. So these are slit valve mechanism. So these are some mechanisms. Let us see how they are actually working in the arching of the conjoint tendons. Yes. See now, what is this ball valve effect, Pinchcock effect, obliquity of the inguinal canal? Let us see what is the shutter mechanism. How is it working? See now, you can see the superficial rings and the deep rings. This is the red arrow is the cord that is traversing. Now the deep ring is attached onto one side. It is one side it is attached to the transversalis fascia, the other side it is attached to the transversus abdominis. So, and then once it contracts, when the transversus abdominis contracts, this closes the transversus abdominis towards the transversalis fascia. So this is how it happens. This is the internal shutter mechanism. So now the ring gets closed and the transversus abdominis moves towards the transversalis fascia. Now the outer shutter mechanism is when the muscles contract because some lifting heavy weights or coughing, some days intra-abdominal pressure, so the muscles contract. So now what happens? The external oblique, when it is contracting, what is the oblique ring, external ring, where is it situated? Where is the external ring situated, students? External ring. External ring is a defect in the external oblique aponeurosis, isn't it? So now when the external oblique contracts, this ring is the anterior wall layer of the external oblique forms the anterior wall, and then the anterior wall is pulled towards the posterior wall. Not only that, the anterior wall also is pulled towards the floor. See, the inguinal ligament is nothing but continuation of the external oblique. So once the external oblique contracts, the roof is the anterior wall approximates to the posterior wall, and the anterior wall also approximates to the floor. So there is obliteration of the inguinal ligament that occurs when the floats. The inguinal canal totally gets shut. The roof approximated to the floor, anterior wall approximated to the posterior wall, and then not only that, the deep ring closes, and the external ring also closes. So this is how the shutter mechanism occurs. Not only this, the deep inguinal ring is guarded by the internal oblique posterior anteriorly. Superficial inguinal ring is guarded by the fleshy conjoint tendon and the fleshy external oblique. So in this way, the rings are guarded both anteriorly, and then the inguinal canal gets obliterated. So this is flap valve is nothing but anterior wall getting approximated to the posterior wall when there is rise in intra-abdominal pressure and the muscles contract. Now this is a ball valve mechanism. What is cremaster muscle, students? What is cremaster muscle? How is it derived from? From which muscle is this derived, students? Can you tell me? Yes, very good. Internal oblique. So a slip of the internal oblique goes on to the cord, and then it surrounds the spirally. So this is nothing but when the internal oblique contracts, the cremaster also contracts, and it pulls up the testis towards the external ring. So now the external ring is closed by the testis that is pulled up. So this is a valve mechanism. So we have a shutter mechanism, we have flap valve mechanism, we have slit valve mechanism, we have a ball valve mechanism. So all these are protective mechanism, and added to this is an obliquity of the inguinal canal, where due to the obliquity, the external ring is not superimposed on the internal ring, and when the muscles contract, the walls get closed. Now let us go into the epidemiology of the inguinal hernia. So this inguinal hernia is very common in two peaks of ages, that is age 5 and after 60 or 70 years of age, when direct hernias are more common. So why should the hernias be common at 5 years age, students? In younger age, which we call as congenital hernias, why should they be common at that age? Any idea, students? Okay, very 5 years, 5 years. Somebody said remnant. What remnant it is? Processus vaginalis, patent processus vaginalis. That is why because when it is patent, if the internal opening is small, only fluid comes, which forms a congenital hernia. And then if the deep ring is wide enough to allow the bowel loops to come, then it becomes a hernia. So congenital hernia or a congenital hydrocele is common if there is patent processus vaginalis at a younger age. So bimodal distribution, and 2/3 of hernias are indirect hernias. Males account for 90% of all inguinal hernias and females only 10%. Femoral hernias are only 30% out of all inguinal hernia, that groin hernias. Out of the 3% femoral hernias, 70% are due to in the females. The femoral hernias are more common, but overall put together, inguinal hernias are the most common hernias even in females. So there is a lifetime risk of nearly 25% of men developing hernia and 10% for the women in their lifetime. So now, indirect hernia occurs more often on the right because the processus vaginalis obliterates a little later on the right side, and sometimes it may even fail to obliterate. So this is now what are the causes? So now you know there are several protective mechanisms, but still there are causes for occurrence. So one is weak musculature. You all know all the mechanisms like valve wall, slit wall, shutter mechanism. All this can happen if the muscles are strong. If the muscles are weak, no way that you can have all these mechanisms in play. Very good. Another one, patent processus vaginalis. Very good. So one is patent processus vaginalis. What are the other? Persistent processus vaginalis. And then the third cause is the raised intra-abdominal pressure. Very good. So when you are examining a patient of hernia, you should try to find out any or all of these causes. At the end, you should be able to put a cause, because the treatment of hernia is not the hernia per se. You also have to treat the predisposing factor. Otherwise, there is going to be a recurrence of hernia. So now let us discuss these two. So in this picture, you can see the testis has nicely come down and the processus vaginalis is obliterated. But here, if this processus vaginalis is patent and the deep ring is wide enough, contents start descending down and you have a hernia. Next is raised intra-abdominal pressure. So now what all you're talking, these are chronic cough, chronic constipation, weightlifting, obesity, pregnancy. All these are causing raised intra-abdominal pressures. So chronic constipation, difficulty in micturition due to a benign prostatic hypertrophy or a stricture urethra, both of which obstruct the outlet to the urethra, will cause a straining at the micturition, which increases the intra-abdominal pressure. Not only this, obesity per se will raise the intra-abdominal pressure, because obesity is nothing but the visceral fat is increasing. So the fat around the viscera, the greater momentum, everything is now fat laden. So the amount of the contents have increased, and this produces a raised intra-abdominal pressure. Not only that, fluid and then fetus, so these or any tumors can also produce raised intra-abdominal pressure. Now the causes of weak musculature, again obesity, lifting heavy weights, multiparous women, and these are and collagen diseases like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, where you can find weak musculature and hernias are very common. Now coming to the examination proper of the exam. When you're so now we have seen the incidence, etiology, pathology, what are the preventive aspects. Now let us clinically discuss a case. When a patient comes to us with a swelling in the groin, what history you should take? What are the two cardinal signs of hernia? What are the two cardinal signs of hernia, students? Very good. Reducibility. Other one is impulse on coughing. Very good. These two are cardinal signs of hernia. Very good. So now you should be able to ask these two questions. When he says, I have a hernia in the groin region, immediately you should ask, is it decreasing? How is it decreasing? Are you reducing it, or is it spontaneously reducing on lying down? So most of the time, direct hernias may spontaneously reduce on lying down because they have a wide neck. Then you should also ask, how is it increasing in size? By straining, by straining at stool, micturition, lifting heavy weights, or prolonged standing. So all these things may produce a increase in size of the swelling. So you must confirm whether these two cardinal signs are present, that is an impulse on coughing and reducibility. Now you should ask for history for predisposing factors in the history. You know what are the predisposing factors. Does he have any chronic cough? Does he have any difficulty in micturition? And then what is the parity? You think of the predisposing factors, and then you should also ask history for complications. So what are the complications of hernia, students? What complications can occur for a hernia? Students, very good. Strangulation, obstruction, very good. What is the first and foremost complication, students? So it is the starting point for any complication to occur is irreducibility. So the first complication is irreducibility, next obstruction, next incarceration, and then strangulation. Hemorrhage. Why should a hemorrhage occur, Joshita? Rupture of sac. You should rupture when you're doing a taxes, but rupture will not occur. Chandana. So you should ask them whether this hernia is an uncomplicated hernia or a complicated hernia by asking him for irreducibility. The patient may say, of late, the swelling has become so big that he is not able to reduce it completely. Partially, it is getting remaining and he is having a dragging pain. So, to start with, the hernia is always painless, but it becomes painful when dragging pain can occur when there's a large hernia, like a sliding hernia. When you can even think like a scrotal abdomen, the whole of the small bowel with the root of mesentery hanging down can be there. So in such case, the patient may have a dragging pain, which is felt in the lower abdomen and periumbilically also, not at the site of the hernia. And then another thing is complications like inflammation. Contents are inflamed, then also the patient can have pain. Another thing is strangulation, which produces a very tender, painful hernia. So now coming to the past history. So this, what all we have described comes under history of present complaint. Now coming to the past history that you should take in a hernia. You should also think of the predisposing factors, but since when this history of previous surgery is important because this can be due to the same complaint, then this can be a recurrent hernia, or it can be due to other surgeries in the vicinity like an appendicectomy with a McBurney's incision. When we try to separate the muscles, there is a chance that the iliohypogastric nerve may get traction and the patient will have a hypotonia of the muscles, and this will predispose for a direct hernia. So you must ask for any previous surgery. Then you should also ask for his medical history like diabetes, hypertension, hypothyroidism, so on and so forth, that he's taking. Some people may take for ecosporin, aspirin for other illnesses when you have to stop these for the treatment. Family history is very important. Why should we take a family history in case of hernia, students? What is the importance of family history? Suppose an 18-year-old boy has come with a hernia. Why should you ask whether his sibling had or the father had? What will it carry? The significance. Students? I told you the non-oblique, yes, collagen diseases, good. Next is non-obliteration of processus vaginalis runs in families. And then it can be bilateral, not only right side. If there is history of hernia in the father or sibling, he may also have hernia the opposite side. So the bilaterality increases. So this is the significance, right? So now coming to the examination proper. You have taken the history. The history of present complaint or past history, family history, personal history of smoking is very, very important that you have to take. Now let us discuss the local examination. So local examination falls under inspection, palpation, percussion and auscultation. So you must examine the patient in a standing position because the gravity itself will make the hernia more prominent. So this will help you to assess the extent of the hernia. So make the patient undress from the umbilicus below onwards, stand in front of the patient and ask the patient to cough. Then you have to see the extent of the hernia, whether it is from the midpoint to the root, the base of the scrotum. So you can see so local extent of the hernia. Next is inspection. So now we will discuss what are the clinical types, but late how do you have to examine just as how you examine a swelling, but first you have to look for the two cardinal signs, that is the cough impulse and then the reducibility. Look for them. Next you have to see the site, size, shape, borders, extent, skin of the swelling, surface of the swelling, and then you have all these things. What is the extent of the swelling? So how do you describe the extent of the swelling? So it is extending from the, here in this picture you can see it is extending from the midpoint of the inguinal ligament to the root of the scrotum. This is called a bubanocele. If it is extending from midpoint to the upper pole of the testis, it is called a funicular hernia. If it is going from the midpoint to the base of the scrotum, it is called a complete hernia. So this will tell us that this is a big sac, right? So that is the inspection. Now coming to the palpation. In palpation, you have to first confirm your impulse on coughing. We call it an expansile impulse on coughing because, why do we call it expansile? Students, what is the meaning of that expansile? Any idea? Yes, very good. More contents are coming into the sac. The swelling is increasing in size of the swelling. You all know that when there is coughing, the raised intra-abdominal pressure, weak muscles, so the ring widens and new contents get pushed off into the sac. So you can find that expansile impulse on coughing. So you have to again confirm your, first you have to see for any local rise of temperature, tenderness. Then you have to see look for the expansile impulse and reducibility. Then before reducibility, you have to confirm the inspectory findings of site, size, shape, borders, extent. Then you reduce the swelling and then you perform the tests. What are the tests that you do? First thing is you do a deep ring occlusion test. Next is a finger invagination test. We'd like to know whether this swelling is coming through the inguinal canal or it is coming through the Hasselbalch's triangle. If it is coming through the inguinal canal, it is the indirect hernia. If it is coming through the Hasselbalch's triangle, it is a direct hernia. So how do you do the deep ring occlusion test? In this patient, there is a scar on the opposite side and this side is the hernia. You have seen him in the inspection part. Now, how do you identify the deep ring? How do you locate the deep ring, students? How do you locate the deep ring? What is the position of the deep ring? Half inch above the midpoint of the inguinal ligament. That is very good. That is the mid-inguinal, it's the midpoint of inguinal ligament. So the extent of the inguinal ligament is from the pubic tubercle to the anterior suprailiac spine. So you first identify these two bony points and then you take the midpoint and then you ask the patient to, you occlude this with a thumb, then you ask the patient to cough. Now you see no swelling. There is no swelling that is appearing. That means the deep ring is occluded. So if there is no swelling, that it is an indirect hernia. You're preventing the hernia entering the deep ring. So an indirect hernia comes through the deep ring, through the inguinal canal, and then comes out through the superficial ring, and then it enters into the scrotum. So if you find a swelling medial to the your finger, that means it is coming through the medial to the inferior epigastric artery or medial to the deep ring, that is through the Hesselbach's triangle, and this must be a direct hernia. So now finger invagination test. Nowadays we are not doing much of finger invagination test because it is not giving us much information, but for completion's sake I am doing this. Is a painful test for the patient, and you have to be very gentle while you're doing this. You must make the patient lie down. First you identify the pubic tubercle, because you're invaginating your finger into the external ring. So what is the location of external ring? It is above and medial to the pubic tubercle. So first you have to identify the pubic tubercle, then you just invaginate. By invaginating your finger, the scroll, you go to from the scrotum down up, you invaginate into the, your finger goes into a defect there, palpate the pubic tubercle, and then above and medially is then you can find the ring. So first thing that you have to see is what is the size of the ring and what is the tone of the muscle. So ask the patient to cough. So once, if you can feel that pinch cough effect, that is the ring constricting your finger, that means the tone of the muscle is good. Or if it is lax, what is the size of the ring? If it is very lax, you can, normally it is a potential space, only tip of the finger goes. But if it is a very wide and lax muscle, you can accommodate more than one finger. So you find the size of the ring, and then the tone of the muscle, and also you can see the direction of the canal, how the finger is going. And then while he's coughing, you can even feel the impulse. But this is all not necessary. It may be, it doesn't, even if you don't find the impulse, this is for completion's sake. If you find from the tip, means it's coming obliquely. If it is coming posteriorly, means it touches the pulp of the finger. That means it is a direct hernia. So first what we have done is a deep ring occlusion test. When you have occluded deep ring, no swelling is appearing, means you are doing with a we are dealing with an indirect hernia. So now coming to the even before this, first is the location. I told you site of the swelling, location. So an inguinal hernia is always above and medial. This is above the inguinal ligament, and the femoral hernia is below and lateral to the pubic tubercle. So this location itself will tell us whether it is an inguinal or a femoral. If it is above, it's an inguinal. And then if you do a deep ring occlusion test, then you know that it is inguinal and an indirect inguinal, right? In this way you derive. And then I'd like to know what is this. You know the taxes. What is taxes? Can you define what is taxes? So taxes is reduction of contents by the examiner. So first of all, always ask the patient to reduce himself, because he knows the techniques to reduce without any pain. Suppose still if the swelling is irreducible or partially remaining, then you can do a taxis. So reduction of the contents of the hernial sac are called taxis. And then what you should know is the particular position is there for the to performing the taxis. You make the patient lie down, and then you flex the thigh, you adduct the thigh, and then you internally rotate his thigh. This will relax the oblique muscles, the rings will become lax, and now you can push with one hand and guide with another hand. Slowly, gently you do. This is called taxis. This has to be done very gently because some complications can occur. So what are the complications, students? The complications that can arise are from taxis. Suppose if you are not gentle, that will produce a lot of pain to the patient, and patient may even have a vasovagal phenomenon. He may faint. Then it may injure the contents. It may produce laceration, contusion of the bowels. And then another entity is called reduction en masse. What is this reduction en masse? So normally when you're reducing the contents, the sac remains in the scrotum. Only the contents go through the ring into the abdomen. So now in reduction and mass, the sac along with the contents is folded into the abdomen. Suppose there is a wide defect of the posterior wall. The ring has widened and the posterior wall is weak. So now nicely the sac will get folded up along with the contents in situ. Suppose this is an irreducible hernia, lot of adhesions are there between the sac and the contents. Even then you are trying to push them inside, there is a chance that the contents will go along with the sac. So now they get folded up and there is a chance of constriction at the neck of the sac and strangulation. So these are the dangers of taxis. One is pain and vasovagal phenomenon. The other one is injury to the contents. The third one is the reduction and mass. Next examination. So now you have seen thoroughly the inspection, palpation, the tests are over. Now you do a percussion just to see another thing is, even before percussion, the consistency. If it is said that if it is gurgling, you can feel that gurgle when you are reducing, and then it is elastic, that means it is enterocele. If it is doughy, it is a momentum, or a granular feeling is there, that is a momentum, but it's very difficult to say. Definitely you can feel the bowels with that gurgle sound. So if it's a large hernia, you can even percuss to see if it is resonant and intestines are the contents. Then auscultation, similarly, you can find the peristaltic sounds. These are not of much importance. Next is you have to, after thoroughly reducing everything, you have to examine the scrotum for the testis, because sometimes the testis can be absent. That is, a hernia is an undescended testis 90% of the times is associated with an indirect inguinal hernia, especially in young children and adolescents. When you are examining for hernia, you have to look for the testis. So you have to see the testis, epidermis, and the spermatic cord. Then you have to examine the opposite side. Then you have to examine for the predisposing factors. I have told you weak musculature. So now you have to test for the weak musculature by doing this head raising test. So you ask the patient to fold his hands behind the head and ask him to lift the head. So this will produce bulges in the region of the inguinal canal, just above the inguinal ligament and adjacent to the iliac crest. You can nicely see the bulging muscles. Normally, when the muscles are taut, you find a rigid muscle, taut muscle. But if the tone is lost, you find a bulge in those areas. So this is called Malgagni's bulgings. This will tell us that he requires a hernioplasty. So for completion's sake, we already know that raised intra-abdominal pressure can be due to a lump or an ascites. Most often, people with portal hypertension and an intractable ascites come with umbilical hernias and then inguinal hernias, in which case hernial management is not the treatment. Treatment of portal hypertension is necessary for them. Okay, so now you also look for how any other masses, etc. Next, you auscultate the chest for any evidence of chronic cough, more so in patients who smoke. So smoking is very, very important in a case of hernia, because it is said that smokers have an abnormal collagen. So once the collagen is abnormal, the strength of the muscles and the fascia is not up to the mark, and they will have hernia. Even healing is not up to the mark in smokers. Not only that, they will have emphysemas, and then they can have interstitial lung diseases and all. So you have to examine the chest. Then nowadays we are not performing any rectal examination. When the patient has difficulty in micturition, we will just ultrasound scan of the abdomen will show us the volume of the prostate. So if he is having any increased prostate, first you have to send him to urology department and get him treated for that condition. Then only think of treating the hernia now. So now we have completed the examination. We have done systemic examination. We have done the opposite examination. Look for any associated hydrocele, because hernia with hydrocele is common. Suppose you find a residual swelling after reducing, then you have to do all the examination for hydrocele. Now, having completed, now you have to define, or you have to put a diagnosis. So how do you that patient, what you have shown in the picture, that is an indirect, because it is going down to the scrotum. It's an indirect, and then incomplete, not totally to the bottom. If it is going to the bottom, it's a complete. Upper part of the testis, it is a incomplete. So indirect, incomplete, uncomplicated inguinal hernia due to, you must say something, raised intra-abdominal pressure, raised or weak musculature, or probably a patent processus vaginalis. So contemplate these three causes and try to name them, so that you have to, you first treat those conditions, like if there is any smoking problem, you have to ask him to decrease smoke. Is reaching to the upper pole of testis, it is called funicular. Funicle means cord, in relation to cord. The complete is if it is reaching to the bottom of the scrotum. See here in this picture, you can see this. Here you can see the direct. Then you can see this is an indirect, and this is the femoral below the inguinal canal. So now let us see the classification for hernia. So there are two classifications. We have a NIHS classification, and you have a European hernia system classification. For completion's sake, you should know what are these. Okay. So now the NIHS classification in 1993, NIHS has divided the hernia into type 1, 2, 3, and 4. So type 1 is, here the inguinal canal is perfect. Nothing, no problem with inguinal canal. The problem is the persistent processus vaginalis. So this is the pediatric hernias are all type 1. Type 2 is wide internal ring. The posterior wall is intact. So now this is the type 2. Type 3 is posterior wall is weak. So you get a direct hernia. If it is in addition to posterior wall, if the deep ring also is widened, you call it, it's a type 3B, and 3C is a femoral hernia. So type 4 is a recurrent hernia. Again, it is ABC basing on direct, indirect, and femoral. And then combination, if pantaloon hernia, you can see hernia on either side of the inferior epigastric hernia. On a direct and indirect component, you call it as a pantaloon hernia. So then you call it as a type T, right? So now, if there are any aggravating factors, you can upstage the hernia into the next class. This is by Stopa. Now the other classification is the European hernia system classification, where this is the latest classification. People are not able to remember all this type 1, 2, 3, 4. The Western people, so they made it easy. So what they have divided, primary and recurrent, that is P or R. Next, L, lateral means indirect. M, medial means it is direct, that is lateral and medial to inferior epigastric vessels. F is femoral, and then they have given some numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, and more than that. That means basing on the defect, the size of the defect of the inguinal canal. If it is 1 finger breadth, 2 finger breadth, 3 finger breadths. So basing on this, like you can see PL1. That means it is a primary hernia, it's an lateral hernia, indirect hernia, and then the defect is 1 centimeter. So this is how they will make it. So this is the EHS classification. Now, what are the this is the complications that irreducible hernia, obstructed and strangulated. We have already discussed. Irreducibility is due to adhesions between the sac and the contents, or in between the contents themselves. Now, irreducibility is more common with the omentosis because omentum has more lymph. It gets adherent easily to the adjacent structures. Obstructed hernia means there is obstruction to the lumen of the intestines that is there in the sac. Most often is a small bowel because the ileal loops are adjacent and they come down. So if there is obstruction to the lumen of the contents, then it is called obstructed hernia. Incarcerated hernia. There is another hernia called incarcerated hernias. There are two types of definitions for an incarcerated hernia. One definition is they say that the large bowel is the content and whose lumen is obstructed with an inspissated fecal matter. That is one thing. And the other one is suppose there is a long-standing hernia and the contents have so much adhered to one another and they form a ball of mass. That is also called a incarcerated hernia. So now this is obstruction. Now strangulation. You should know what are the strangulated. Strangulated hernia is there is obstruction plus ischemia. Two components are there. When there is compromise of the vascularity of the content due to constriction at its narrowest part, that is the neck. You know the content, the parts of the sac are a fundus body and a neck. The neck is a deep ring. So now when there is constriction, there can be ischemia, gangrene, then it will perforate. And what are the clinical findings to say that this is a strangulated hernia is it is tense and tender. The two T's will stand to strangulated hernia. You must tell. Then another thing is absent cough impulse. When the impulse, because why the impulse is absent, students, in a complicated hernia, there is no cough impulse. Why? Students, are you there with me? Can you tell me why there is no cough impulse in a complicated hernia, like an irreducible or an obstructed or a strangulated hernia? Students? Students? So, okay, adhesions. Very good. There are no new contents entering the sac. There is no place for the new contents to enter. That is why there will not be a cough impulse anymore. So if you elicit, they will say that it was reducible, there was an increase on straining, but now of late it has remained the same. So the absence cough impulse is a sign of a complicated hernia. So tense, tender. Why it has become tense is there is inflammatory fluid within the sac. Because there is constriction, ischemia, release of inflammatory mediators, and there is a chance that the sac is now filled with not only the swollen content but also inflammatory fluid. So it is tense and painful. This you must tell these two features. Strangulated hernia will come as a 4-mark question for you. It is very often asked, so you should write all these things. Now let us see other types of hernias. Hernia anglicide or a sliding hernia. So some structures are sliding. So see, this is a picture of sliding hernia. What you can see is a sac. The posterior wall of the sac is formed by a sliding component. See here, the peritoneum, the posterior peritoneum along with the structures attached to it is sliding down. That is, you can see the ascending, the cecum, appendix have come down into the sac. While the other content, the small bowel are also there. So a sliding hernia is a hernia where the part of the posterior wall is formed by cecum on the right side, sigmoid on the left side, and sometimes the bladder also can slide down. And apart from that, the regular contents of small bowel can be there. Now, there is another hernia called Richter's hernia. So what is Richter's hernia, students? Richter's hernia is a part of circumference of the wall. The whole the whole bowel loop has not protruded through the opening. Only a part of the wall, a part of circumference of the wall has protruded. So here the lumen is patent. So here this can be a strangulated hernia, because this occurs generally in hernias where the opening is very small, like umbilical hernia or a femoral hernia or an obturator hernia or other abnormal hernias where the small openings in the ligaments or fascia are there. So Richter's hernia will not have obstruction as a symptom of even a strangulation. Now, Madel's hernia is called hernia, where the W loop of hernia has protruded. Two loops of bowel have protruded. The connecting loop has remained in the abdomen and it got constricted at the neck. So as such, the loops in the abdomen are vascular, in the sac are vascular, and there may not be any signs of strangulation in the scrotum or in the inguinal region, but in the abdomen, the patient will have a strangulated bowel with perforation and peritonitis. So this is very dangerous hernia. This is a hernia, the Madel's hernia. Litter's hernia is where there is appendix as the content, right? Now, one thing that we have, Meckel's diverticulum, very good. Yes, you are correct. Appendix is Amions's hernia. Meckel's diverticulum is the Litter's hernia. So we understand now that a swelling without cough impulse also can be a complicated hernia. A swelling with a cough impulse may not be a hernia. Why is it so, students? Can there be a cough impulse and without herniation? Can you tell me a clinical condition where there is some impulse on coughing? More so in the femoral region, in the femoral canal, near femoral canal. It can be a saphenous varix. You know, a saphenous varix can have some, you may feel some impulse, but it may not be a hernia. So you should be careful, right? Now coming to the management part of the hernia. Shall we continue with the management, students? Vishnu Teja?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Shall we continue with this? Are you able to follow? You are a 7th semester student, no, Vishnu Teja? Joshita, all of you are Mansi. I think I'm seeing more of 7th semester students. Do you want to continue with the management part?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now, when you call any management, you must say that you have to deal with investigations and treatment. What investigations do you want to do for a hernia patient? Most of the times, confirmation of hernia is by clinical tests only. But sometimes the patient may tell us that he is having some swelling, but you may not find the swelling. In such cases, you have to do a ultrasound scan abdomen and see for any protrusion of the peritoneum. So ultrasound scan and a herniogram, that is also mentioned. Sometimes the contrast is injected and the patient is placed in a prone position when the contrast leaks into this weak protrusions of the peritoneum. So this is called a herniogram. And then there is also one test that I forgot, the Siemens test, which is also done for small hernias, where you have to differentiate a femoral hernia. Next, coming to the treatment aspect. So now the treatment of hernia, you have 3 entities: herniotomy, herniorophy, and hernoplasty. And then we can also call as tissue repairs and prosthetic repairs. So now coming to the herniotomy. What is herniotomy? So if you want to define a herniotomy, it is isolation of the sac along from the cord structure. See, now you know an indirect sac descends through the deep ring through the inguinal canal and comes out. So it is incorporated in the cord structures. What are the cord structures? What are the cord structures, students? Okay. So cord structures are, first of all, vas deferens. Then you have a the testicular artery, then the pampiniform plexus of vein, the lymphatics, and the nerve, the genital, branch of genital femoral nerve. These all form the cord structures. Now, then the sac is lying anterior to this cord structures. So anterior and lateral to the cord structure. So now you have to separate them. So till the neck of the sac. So how do you do that? How do you know that you have reached the neck of the sac? By seeing the pulsations in the inferior epigastric artery. You all know that the indirect sac is lateral to the inferior epigastric artery. Suppose you see the inferior epigastric, so you have to dissect the sac till you see the inferior epigastric artery pulsations or extraperitoneal pad of fat. These two are the features to say that you have reached the neck of the sac. Now here you have to transfix and ligate and excision at the neck. This is called herniotomy. So isolation of the cords, the sac from the cord structures, and ligation, high ligation at its neck and excision is called herniotomy. Now herniorophy is strengthening of the posterior wall by repairing with indigenous structures, that is the posterior wall structures. Hernoplasty is strengthening of the posterior wall by placing some prosthetic materials in the posterior wall. So this is called hernoplasty. So now let us see what are the tissue. Normally the tissue repairs are called the herniorophies. Prosthetic repairs are called hernoplasty. Now then we have open repairs and laparoscopic repairs. Next, let us first complete the tissue repairs. So tissue repairs, we have Bassanese repair, modified Bassanese repair, Chaldeus repair, and Desardas repair. So these are tissue repairs that we have. Then Bassanese repair. So now you all know the posterior wall is formed by the conjoint tendon, muscles and tendon, and the transversalis fascia. So repair of these structures is called Bassanese repair. So you take a bite in a normal area, not a weak protruding area. You take a bite, you open up the transversalis fascia, and then you repair the transversalis fascia. See, Eduardo Bassani is called father of hernia surgery. He is the one, he described the importance of transversalis fascia. Then prior to him, they were not doing any repair to the posterior wall. They used to only excise the sac. Only herniotomy used to be done. But Bassani has come and in the late 19th century, and he is the one who contemplated repair of the posterior wall by suturing the conjoint tendon and the transversalis fascia to the reflected part of the inguinal ligament. So that this is called Bassani's repair. But now modified Bassani's repair is being done when we are doing a tissue repair, where we don't open the transversalis fascia, we just take a bite from the conjoint tendon and we fix it to the inguinal ligament. So this is called modified Bassani's repair. We do with Prolene, number 1 Prolene. We put interrupted sutures. Previously, earlier Bassani has done with silk, but now we do with a polypropylene suture material. So this is how now the modified Bassani is conjoint tendon to the reflected part of the inguinal ligament. Now there is Chaldeus repair. Chaldeus repair is akin to Bassani's repair, where here you can see in Bassani's repair that the transversalis fascia and the conjoint tendon are en masse sutured to the inguinal ligament. But in shoulder disc repair, what they have done, they have sutured individually. They have double-breasted the transversalis fascia. Then they have double-breasted the conjoint tendon and the inguinal ligament. Then they have placed the cord and they have double-breasted the external oblique. So each layer is sutured into two. So 6-layered repair is done with a fine stainless steel. This is called Scholdi's repair. So this is done in Scholdi's hospitals. And now what we do, there is another tissue repair. This is de Zarda's technique, is the now new method of tissue repair. It is found that placing the mesh is producing lot of infection. So what they have done is they are suturing the bridging the protruded part, the weak part of the transversalis fascia or the posterior wall by mobilizing one strip of external oblique. So they're keeping the strip, they have cut superiorly and inferiorly, and they mobilize a ribbon-like external oblique, keeping it attached to the rest of the external oblique. They're mobilizing it into the inguinal, the posterior wall, and the superior layer, the superior border of the strip is sutured to the conjoint tendon. The inferior border of strip is sutured to the inguinal ligament. That means they're using this strip as a prosthetic material in place of a mesh. This is called de Zarda's technique. So now let us see the hernioplasty. Hernioplasty, what we are doing is Lichtenstein's tension-free hernioplasty. That is what is being done from 1980s onwards. That previously, prior to Lichtenstein, what they used to do a modified Bassani repair by suturing the conjoint tendon to the inguinal ligament. Then they used to place a mesh on the posterior wall. But Lichtenstein has come and said that this is not necessary. You can put the mesh directly on the posterior wall, fix the superior border to the conjoint tendon, inferior border to the inguinal ligament, the reflected part, and the medial, below and medially to the pubic tubercle. This is called the master stitch. The first stitch is to the pubic tubercle, and then the lateral border of the mesh is divided into two, and it encircles the cord, just like a fish tail, so that and again it is sutured behind the cord. So here we are strengthening the deep ring. So this is how it is. So medially below to the pubic tubercle, above to the rectus sheath. Laterally it is crisscrossed onto the cord, surrounding the cord. Superiorly to the conjoint tendon, inferiorly to the inguinal ligament. This is how they have, without any tension, very few stitches here and there. So since this is a very painless procedure for the patient, can be done even in a local anesthesia. So these are this is the most common repair that is done, is a Lichtenstein hernia. So now we also have other hernia repair. Suppose there is a femoral hernia. Well, how do you repair? They put a plug to the into the femoral canal, and they put a patch onto that is a posterior wall repair, again with a mesh. The mesh that is used is a polypropylene mesh. The size of the mesh is 7 inches by 15 inches or 6 inches by 11 inches. This is fixed with a 2-0 polypropylene suture. So this is called anterior tissue prosthetic repair. Anteriorly we are going through the inguinal canal. There are other repairs called suprainguinal or posterior or preperitoneal repairs, where they go above the inguinal ligament, above the inguinal canal. They go directly to the preperitoneal space, and they put a mesh in the preperitoneal region. This is called rives. If it is done on one side, it is called stoppas. If it is done on either side together, this is called great GPRVS. That is the great prosthetic repair of visceral sac. GPRVS by the stoppa repair. This is a posterior Preperitoneal prosthetic repair, suprainguinal repair done for recurrent hernias, large hernias, right? So now we also have a laparoscopic hernias. This is a Bassani, as I've told you. Now we have various types of meshes. Most commonly, we have a polypropylene mesh, which is having a large pores. Large pores will make the fibroblasts migrate, and the mesh gets nicely incorporated into the tissues. So this strengthens the tissues, and now the tissues can withstand the raised intra-abdominal pressure. So polypropylene is most often used material, but there are other meshes like polytetrafluoroethylene, EPTFE, what they call expanded PTFE, and then we have a composite mesh. What is this composite mesh? Composite mesh means two-layered mesh. One layer of polypropylene outside, inner is a PTFE layer. So why do we use this PTFE? Is if you want to repair an incisional hernia, where you have to place this PTFE on the inner aspect. This PTFE is a smooth surface, micropores are there. So since the micropores are there, migration of the fibroblasts are less. So the adhesions are less if you place the mesh on the interior of the abdominal wall. Otherwise, if we put a polypropylene directly onto the abdominal, into the abdominal cavity, the intestines can go and cause adhesion. So they put a composite mesh. Then we have a Prolene hernia system and biological. This is a Prolene hernia system. Here you can see two layers are there. One is into the posterior wall. The other one is into the preperitoneal or behind the transversalis fascia, and the connecting stem is there. This Prolene hernia system is also used. Next we have here, you can see one side is an non-absorbable, the other side is a smooth EPTFE. Next, biological mesh is also used where there is a collagen tissue from the decellularized collagen tissue of the animal dermis is used as a mesh instead of putting a polypropylene when you're dealing with intestines, and also this biological mesh can be kept intra-abdominally. It also can be used, suppose there are stomal hernias where there is stoma, a colostomy stoma, parastomal hernias, we can use a biological mesh. So now, this is a picture showing the Lichtenstein repair. Already I have described how we have placed it. Next, laparoscopic repair where we have a total extraperitoneal and a transabdominal preperitoneal repairs where you place a mesh on the myopectineal orifice. I have showed you the lateral and the medial places that the total myopectineal orifice is used. They go well below the inguinal ligament and fix the mesh to the pectineal ligament, that is the Cooper's ligament. So here the advantage of laparoscopic hernia is all the three orifices, the direct and the indirect and the femoral orifice are closed, while by an open repair we are fixing the lower edge of the mesh to the inguinal ligament. So we are leaving the femoral canal unsupported. So there is a chance that the patient may develop a femoral hernia even you do a hernia repair for a openly. But here in a laparoscopic repair, you can nicely cover the whole of the myopectineal orifice. But the disadvantage with the laparoscopic hernia is long curve of learning is there, and important structures like the iliac vessels are there, and the triangle of doom, triangle of pain, so many things are there. So this is some expertise is required to do a inguinal hernia repair. So next, what are the complications after a surgery? So now you know complications of a hernia as such, complications of hernial repair. So now when you are, one thing is after a surgery there may be a pain or a perfect hemostasis and suturing suturing without tension are the two hallmarks of success. If you do haphazardly, or if you handle the tissues roughly, there is a chance that there can be bleeding post-operatively or a seroma. There's inflammatory reaction from the tissues where a seroma can occur, hematoma can form, in which case there's a chance of infection, weak scar forming, the mesh cannot be incorporated, and there is a chance of infection of this foreign material. So we have to handle them very carefully, all the tissues, gentle handling, suturing without tensions. So these are the things. Next, wound infections. Sometimes when you are doing a cord dissection, separating the sac, you can devascularize the supply to the vas. Then the vas will heal with ischemia and obstruction can occur. Patient may go into sterility or testicular atrophy can occur, or there is a damage to the nerve, the ilioinguinal nerve, genital branch of genitofemoral nerve, where the inguinodynia, the patient will have a severe pain, the neuralgic pain post-operatively. So you have to be very careful when you are doing a dissection. You should not damage any structures in the inguinal canal. So in the inguinal canal, when you open the extend oblique, you can see you are in the inguinal canal. What you can see is an ilioinguinal nerve, and you can see the cord structures. These two you have to preserve them properly and do your job there. So now there is an entity called sportsman's hernia, where there is severe pain in the groin area extending into the upper thigh. There is tenderness of the pubic tubercle and attachment of the erector longus. This is due to the tearing of the tendon there. This is also called Gilmore's groin. Now coming to the femoral hernia, this is less common than inguinal hernia. It is more common in females. It is easily missed on examination. 50% present only at an emergency with a strangulation. And then, so you all know the boundaries. You should know the boundaries of the femoral canal. It is surrounded by on three sides with ligaments. Only on one side, medial, laterally, it is a fascia separating from the femoral vein. So superiorly and anteriorly, it is the inguinal ligament. Posteriorly, inferiorly, sorry, it is anteriorly, inferiorly inguinal ligament, posteriorly and superiorly the Cooper's ligament or the pectineal ligament, and then medially it is a lacunar ligament or the Gimbernard's ligament, which is nothing but extension of the inguinal ligament onto the symphysis pubis, and laterally it is a septum separating it from the femoral canal. So now what is the treatment? What is the tissue repair? Is suturing of the Cooper's ligament to the inguinal ligament. This is the tissue repair. But now what we do is we plug the femoral canal by rolling the mesh like a cigar and fixing it to the edge of the ligament, and then putting a patch on the posterior wall. But sometimes the patient may come to us with strangulation. So or patient may come even without, suppose you are doing a below directly onto the swelling, you give an incision and you go subinguinal, it's called Lockwood. Then you go inguinal, transinguinal approach is called Lothesens, and high approach is called transabdominal, is called McAvidy's, or suprainguinal approach is called McAvidy's approach. Other method of treatment is a laparoscopic approach. Now, so with this, we have completed the hernia. I think we have done for 1.5 hours. Thank you for your patient hearing. Any doubts? Those students who are with me, I have completed femoral hernia. I have completed, in short, laparoscopic hernia. And then I have told you the tissue repairs, the various types of mesh, the hernioplasty treatments,